Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Now, Apple, iPhone, iOS is a group that is focused on accessible gaming, and today we have someone who is covered a wide gambit of accessibility, both in his personal, everyday job as well as at night working on accessible gaming. We have Jesse Anderson from Illegally Cited. Jesse, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Now, Jesse, as I kind of said there in the beginning, I mean, you have had kind of a nice history in accessibility, both in your day job as well as, what you do for fun at night.
Mhm.
Why don't you tell us, a little bit about yourself and, how you got into accessibility and accessibility gaming?
Sure. Well, I have been legally blind all my life. I have some usable vision, so I can still see well enough to play some mainstream games. I mean, visually kind of get around and stuff. I can read some large print if magnified enough, but I do use a lot of screen readers and stuff like that as well. My day job, I work for the state of Minnesota as an assistive technology specialist, primarily working with transition age students. So students who are, high school, early college, trying to look at getting a job or going to school to get said job and make sure that they have the technology and the training and skills that they need for those types of things. Outside of my day job, especially over the last 5-10 years or so, I've really got into a lot more of just other technology and game and even virtual reality accessibility in the past several years. I've always sort of been into, well, actually, I've really been into assistive technology and games and all this kind of stuff as long as I can remember. I've had jobs in the past where I've worked as a technology instructor, worked with like accessibility in college, trying to make a lot of their learning management systems and websites and all that stuff, working with instructors and staff, trying to make that accessible. So I've kind of just grew into it. And then the YouTube channel thing, that just, I think that's another question, but yeah, I just kind of got into that further from naturally being an assistive technology user and avid gamer and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and your history of gaming, much like myself, if I'm right, goes all the way back to like the 2600, right?
yeah, my first I remember being at my babysitter's house when I was really little and seeing their Atari 2600 and just being fascinated with the fact that I could control things on the screen, good old things like combat and all that kind of stuff. And then when I saw the NES, the first Nintendo system, that's all she wrote. I was hooked ever since. And
Now,
Apple II and all that good stuff too.
Now, in that progression, if you go back to the 2600, there's obviously pretty simple graphics, that you could
Hmm.
probably, with some limited vision, still be able to figure what was happening. Was there any point where things almost got too complex that it kind of just became too muddled for you to see and then forced you to rely more on some accessibility assistive technology to really play the games?
Well, I mean, that's a fair question. It actually depends a lot on the game and depends on the type of game because yeah, um there are genres that are definitely harder for me to play. I typically tend to shy away from games that have a whole lot of text in them. So maybe role-playing games that don't really have a voice acting, but they have, buckets of text. um I love first person shooters, like Doom and all that kind of stuff, but I really don't care for the more realistic ones where it's like, oh, you're going through an environment and one, by the time you actually see who's after you, if you don't see them first, you're dead. It's like one
Right,
shot, one kill.
right.
Those are really hard for me. Just a lot of games just have a lot of text in them. Because even like whether it's an action game or role playing game or whatever it is, even if it's like actiony, there's a lot more like skill trees and weapon loadouts and just there's a lot of comparing stats and stuff. Some of that
Right.
gets a little annoying. But even things like your traditional like side scrolling platformer, like a Mario type of game. Some games are, you know, depending on whether, like if they have really detailed backgrounds or things like that, where it's hard to differentiate between, you know, what's a platform or what something
Right.
blends into the foreground or background. Those
Right.
things can be difficult, but I play a good variety of pretty much any kind of game, you know, action, puzzle, racing, whatever. But yeah, there is a point where, especially, you know, with high definition consoles and PC games and stuff like that, where some games can be really tough.
Yeah, I mean, I lost my sight 3 years ago. You know, went from
Hmm.
fully sighted to completely blind 3 years
Hmm.
ago. And the thing that I find right now, like I can't imagine. I was talking the other night to this guy TJ, the blind gamer, who has like 13,000 kills on Call of Duty, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even know how you do that because I need so much time, and maybe that's because I'm relatively new to being blind, but to just kind
Sure.
of process what is happening, you know, like, yeah, I'm much better on something that is turn-based, let's say, so I can take as much time as I want to figure out
Hmm.
what is happening and where everybody is, and you know what's going on. Those you know, live action, quick moving, open world games. You know, it really impresses me when someone who, you know, has limited sight, you know, has any sort of success on
Hmm.
those, because I couldn't do it.
Well, and that's the funny thing is like I mean, even just from a gameplay perspective, like I've never really been into the turn-based games all that much. You know, I had a couple of college friends and stuff who are really into like the Final Fantasy games and stuff like that. And you know, the stories can be kind of neat, but I just like, especially the earlier games where it was like, you know, you've got one group of people on the left, a group of people on the right, and they're just kind of running back and forth, slapping each other, and then why, you know, and then going back to the other side. I'm like, no, if I'm gonna, you know, I don't want to play a game through menus. I want to actually control my guy.
Right.
So I've kind of been always more into the action based stuff. I've played a few turn based games that I've rather enjoyed. I like the South Park game. That
Oh,
was
that's a
pretty
good one.
good.
Yeah. Well, that's just it,
Stick of Truth was so good.
it's just a laugh a minute.
Oh,
It's the
it's
thing.
hilarious.
Um, yeah, I mean, I was a big, like, I loved, you know, Fallout and Skyrim, and you know,
Oh yeah.
those at least for me right now, those are beyond my reach of
Right,
potential.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, I played. I don't even know how many hours of Oblivion I played.
Well, and that's, you know, that's why you know, I know you cover this on your YouTube page, but that's why I kind of focused in after losing my sight is, you know, what can I, you know, really
Oh,
manage
absolutely.
well. And so I switched over to iPhone games, you know, a built-in voice reader, you know, with voiceover, and a
Hmm.
lot of things are kind of, you know, that are supported with that accessibility are things that are more term-based or text-based, or, you know, that's not, you're not doing a, like, you know, a Fallout type of game with accessibility on your phone. So just naturally the games are a little bit more playable and a little bit more manageable for me. And
Right.
so that's why I kind of started that group and decided to, you know, make sure that other people were aware of, you know, a bunch of accessible games that are on the phone, and kind of sharing that. And I know you cover mobile games on your site as well as VR and as well as console games. So, you know, why don't you just tell us a little bit of, you know, if people go to uh, your YouTube page, which is, I just
Hmm.
love the name. It's illegally sighted instead of legally blind, which I love. You know, why don't you tell people, you know, the type of
Sure.
content that they would find out there?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, I mean, I just realized this a couple months ago, but yeah, illegally cited has been a thing now for almost 10 years in May,
Wow. Very
which
cool.
is, yeah, which is nuts. But it was kind of strange the way it started. Like I said, I really didn't have any intention of doing the whole YouTube thing. It was just one of those things that, you know, everyone was sort of doing it. And a friend of mine and I, we had gotten sucked into Minecraft pretty hard for a while when it was really early days. And so we were building our creations and trying to share them back and forth, like, oh, check out the castle I made, or check out this thing that I, you know, I did. And it got really hard sending these giant map files back and forth because they just started becoming huge. And so we're like, you know, we can actually share some of this. And I just, on a whim, we had, my friend had put a server together, and so we were then we started building on a server, So we could, both play on the same space and walk around each other's areas and stuff like that. And so I just decided, well, I've got this recording software. I'll just record a couple of videos, and that way we can share what we created and just throw it up there for whatever. I just thought it was going to be one of those things that, we would look at on occasion. And then after that, I'm like, that was kind of interesting. And so I decided to throw up a video on just a game that I was playing at the time. And, I did that for a little bit. I was really inspired by, like, my videos are generally just, I go through and I play a game for a period of time. They're not scripted. They're not really edited at all. It's kind of like if you're familiar with Giant Bomb.
Yeah.
So I really was inspired by their quick look videos, because I really like just let's roll a game. If it's awesome, great. If it's a train wreck, okay, well, you learn that too.
Right.
And so when I first started, I actually called them quick looks. But then I'm like, well, I don't really want to just completely rip them off. So I was trying to think of something else, and I called them low vision spotlight. And so I've kind of just named everything around then. So on the channel, yeah, I cover a variety of different things. Everything is divided into playlists. So if you're looking for some type of content specifically, you can find it pretty easily through the playlists. But I cover a lot of low vision spotlight games, which are titles that are, that you do need some usable vision to be able to play. So people can look at the videos and determine, well, would I be able to see well enough to be able to play this or not? I have a couple of playlists for PC accessible games and iOS accessible games. And of course, I refer to those as games like you can play if you are totally blind. They might be self-voicing, they might use a screen reader, they might be an audio game, whatever. But if they're games that can be playable by a totally blind gamer, then they'll go under there. I do hardware reviews, a few geeky videos, a couple like geeky things that I've collected over the years, which just last year I got this really, really cool Optimus Prime you should check out. It's awesome. It's so good. But then, yeah, I do also some virtual reality accessibility. I got into that in, was it 2015 when the Oculus Rift came out, and been really trying to push for virtual reality accessibility. Not really making much headway in that space. We can talk about that more later if you want to, but yeah, I mean, when VR works, it's extremely, extremely cool. But it is kind of frustrating because in about the 6 years that we've had VR, there really hasn't been anything really consumer facing that has improved VR accessibility, that like built-in accessibility features or anything, which is a shame. But I'm hoping that's going to change.
When,
So
when
yeah, it's a good variety of stuff.
when you take all of those different, computer, phone, consoles, VR,
Mhm.
on each of those, if you could think off the top of your head, what has been your, you know, best accessibility gaming experience, or, or what would you recommend if you're going to do something accessibility on the computer, play XYZ game?
Yeah, I mean, I think every platform has its own advantages and disadvantages. I think where you're going to find a lot of where you're going to find the most accessible games is probably the PC, Windows PC in particular, and iOS. I mean, some stuff does cross over to the Mac. But there's, for PC games, there are a variety of different like audio games and screen reader accessible games, and even in mainstream gaming, like you can get some games on a Mac, but it's not necessarily known as the, place for gamers.
Right.
But like, you'll find quite a bit on PC, and you'll find quite a bit on iOS, as you said, since the iPhone came out and voiceover works as well as it does. And then you have some self-voicing games and audio games and stuff like that. There's a good variety of stuff. I mean, the iOS games, there are some titles that are a little bit more in depth, but you're probably going to find more of your, like, there's a ton of word games. There's a ton of like text adventures and stuff like that, I don't know that you're going to find as many, like, like you said, Skyrim or something. You're not going to find something really deep like that. But there are some good RPGs and stuff on there as well. The nice thing is that consoles are becoming more of a viable option. Both Microsoft, their Xbox Series X and S consoles now, and Sony PlayStation 5, they all have built-in screen readers for their dashboards now. So you can browse the store, you can go through your library, adjust settings, add friend lists, all that kind of stuff. But the games themselves, and I know that's one of your future questions, so I'll hold on that. But there's some barriers to getting some of the games to be accessible. But I do know that there's a lot of people on console, blind players, who play especially fighting games, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct. There's some really good players, and I don't know if you've heard of the Sento Showdown.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
So
was
that's
just
a really
talking.
cool, really cool thing.
I was just talking that with TJ the Blind Gamer, because he was one of the people who was,
Mhm. Yeah,
helping to set
yes.
that up.
So
For
that's a
those,
really awesome thing.
yeah, for those who don't know, that's an all blind player fighting tournament.
Yep, Mortal Kombat. So yeah, I mean, there's getting to be more of those. And just last year, in addition to PC, the Xbox One, if you've heard of or if you've played the Veil,
Yeah, I've heard that. Yep.
yep, it is available on PC, but it is available as an Xbox game. So you can play a total audio RPG on your Xbox, which is pretty sweet. So, there, and then of course on the PlayStation side, this will tie into one of your future questions, I think, but The Last of Us 2, boy, man, that game is just unbelievably awesome.
Yeah. No. So I end up talking about Last of Us Part Two because right at the time that I lost my sight,
Hmm.
that had just come out, and
Yes.
um, I had played Last of Us, the original game,
Hmm. Hmm.
loved it, one of my all-time favorite games,
Amen.
and played that game as a fully sighted person. And so
Hmm.
when I tried to play Last of Us Part Two, it was very difficult for me because it was not the experience, not that it could be, but it was not the sighted experience that I had once, enjoyed. And
Hmm.
so, kind of the more that I played it and more that I tried to get it work and tried to get, that sighted joy out of it, actually, the more depressed I became, because it kind of just highlighted to me that I was kind of blind and in a new world. I mean, I was very fresh of being, having lost my
Right.
sight. And that's actually, I put the controller down. It's the last time I have picked up a console controller. And I said, well, I got to be able to play a game, but it's got to be where it's not frustrating me, or it's not reminding me of something that I once had that I don't have now. And so that's where I switched over to, really focus on games on the phone.
Sure. Well, and I mean, to be fair too, like you're diving, I mean, you were diving into a game that like it is actually really accessible to
Okay.
blind players. It's
Yeah.
phenomenally accessible, actually.
No, yeah, I am
But
super
it's,
impressed with what they've been able to do. It's just,
yeah.
the time where I was in my life, it
Well, no,
hit me
exactly.
wrong. Yeah.
I mean, you're diving into the deep end of, like, I mean, the way that the environments are and just the complexity of the game mechanics. And, it's kind of like learning the computer as a let's say like if I was just going to blindfold myself, if I had never used a screen reader before, um trying to learn how to use a computer without touching the mouse. I mean, you take somebody's sighted mouse away and they're like, oh my god, what do I do?
Right.
And so there's just that level of complexity. I think, after you'd gotten used to it for a while, I think it probably would have been better. But yeah, I can totally see where you're coming from with that. I mean, as a low vision gamer, I would play it kind of as a visual gamer, but I would still, the navigation assists and like just like, that's a game where the environments were so beautiful, but at the same time, because they were so detailed, like in the first game, it was sometimes hard to figure out where to go. It's like, oh, you got to shoot this little latch and then the ladder falls down or whatever. And if you miss that, you're like, where the heck do I go?
Right.
So like just having that sort of click the analog stick and go, oh, go that way. And then it just helped so much. Like it just, that type of navigation assist or even like the high contrast, I would use their text to speech and have it narrate what I was picking up and like going through my backpack. All of those accessibility features for me just really, as much as I love the first game, like man, when that game came out, like I binged the hell out of it for like I think I beat it in like 3 days because I was just like
Yeah.
plowing through it. I mean, it just made it a joy to play for me. And now that a game like that has come out, that's the thing is the consoles, now that somebody has proven that it can be done on that level, it's going to take a few years for other companies to figure it out or to catch up or even do some of that. But I think in the next 3 to 5 years we're going to see more games that are good for that.
It definitely raised the awareness as well.
Yeah, well, and like for me, like I don't know if this ties into one of your other questions, but like I love audio games, I love voiceover accessible games and stuff like that. But honestly, like, and part of it is maybe because I've been legally blind or illegally sighted, as you say, all my life. I have kind of a foot in both worlds, like the visual world and the blind world. But like, as fun as I and as much as I enjoy audio games and things, I find that a lot of them just don't hold my attention
Mhm.
near as much as like the mainstream games do. There just seems to be more complexity, more replayability, variety, where I mean, don't get me wrong, like I said, I still love like the Atari, the NES style games. Um, but you know, a lot of the audio games just seem a little bit more simplistic in a way,
Sure.
and they just don't hold my attention as much.
Now you've done some uh, like accessibility consulting, right? Has that been
Mhm.
with game developers?
Yes, I've done some with I've done some with accessible apps like Voice Dream Reader and a couple other apps, and I've also done it with some iOS games, some that are accessible, some that are voiceover accessible. But I've also, in the last 2 3 years, have gotten to do some accessibility and even a play test or two with mainstream developers like Microsoft and Ubisoft. So that's a really cool thing because the other thing that's really sad is, and it's sort of frustrating, is like as much as I love audio games and like the voiceover accessible games, we've seen it time and time again, where you get this really awesome audio game or this really awesome voiceover game or whatever, and it's there for a while, but it kind of loses support over time, and eventually the app gets pulled from the app store because it's a small developer. They're kind of catering to a niche market, and so if they can't keep the money flowing in to keep the lights on and keep development going, we've seen a lot of even PC or iOS games just sort of disappear
Sure.
over time. And so the trend that I like is having more mainstream games also become accessible because maybe they have a little bit better chance of surviving a little bit longer, or we can play the same games that everybody else plays and have be in those conversations a little bit more.
Now, with that consulting that you've done for game developers, do you reach out to them, or you've made a name enough for yourself that they reach out to you? How does that come about?
um I've seen a couple minor little things. I've seen a couple things on Twitter that I've reached out for, like if I've seen an announcement from a game developer, they're looking for people. A lot of it, interestingly, has been people reaching out to me. I've been a member of the Able Gamers player panels, which you can sign up for. Basically, you provide some information to them, like what your disability is, what kind of games you like, all kinds of different things. And then it's kind of a lot of game developers will use them to, it's like, oh, well, hey, we have a game and we want to make sure that, people with low vision or people who have a mobility impairment or whatever, they'll reach out to able gamers and they'll look at their database and go, oh, okay, well, here's some potential users. We'll contact them and see if they're interested. So I've gotten some that way, just some connections that I've made either via Twitter or through the Game Accessibility Conference, which I attended a few years ago, 2019. Just kind of making some connections here and there. Of course, Ian Hamilton, he's the man when it comes to game accessibility. So I've made a few connections over the years, and I've been recommended by a couple of people here and there. So yeah, I've gotten a few opportunities through there, made a few Microsoft connections, that kind of a thing.
Now the Game Accessibility Conference, which I think just happened this week for this year, am I right in saying that you spoke at that at one time?
Yes, I did. In 2019, that was the last one, I believe, in person until this whole pandemic happened. Yeah, I went down there and I was part of a panel. There was 3 of us who were talking about low vision game accessibility. And I mean, that was just a blast. It was a one-day conference back then. Now the cool thing is there's been so much content around game accessibility. It's a 2-day conference now. But it was just really cool, like listening to the sessions live, but then during breaks and the kind of after party after the conference, just getting to talk to developers, many of which I played their game, so I got to nerd out and be like, oh man, you made that, that's so cool. So
when you say it was down there, where was it physically?
I was in San Diego. No, not San Diego, San Francisco, I believe.
San Francisco. Okay.
Yeah, San Francisco. Yeah.
Now, how did you get picked to be on a panel again? Did someone reach out to you, or did you?
Yeah, Ian Hamilton, they were putting together a panel on low vision accessibility, and he asked if I was interested. He said that he would really like for me to be a member of the panel and give my thoughts. And so we just chatted a little bit. And
for those who don't know, why don't you tell them who Ian Hamilton is?
Yeah, Ian Hamilton is basically one of the main game accessibility advocates. Like he's the original, he started along with Tara Velker. They started the Game Accessibility Conference, but he's been working in the game accessibility field for a number of years now. And like when you kind of say game accessibility, like that's the first name that comes to mind is Ian Hamilton. I attended a CSUN, the CSUN Technology Conference in 2015, and he had a session on the progress of game accessibility, which was very, very just kind of starting to take off. And I attended his session. We chatted a little bit afterward and chatted via email. And that's where I really kind of kicked things into high gear, doing more with like the accessibility consulting, being a little bit more focused on the channel. Because when I started the channel, like I said, I was kind of just putting up random videos that it's like, okay, let's check this game out. Let's see what this game is like with low vision. But then I was trying to figure out, how do I differentiate it between all the other gazillions of channels and content out there? And when I started it at the time, there weren't really that many blind or low vision people on YouTube or, even on like Twitch or anything. Now there's a good number of people streaming and making, YouTube content. But at the time there really wasn't. So I was kind of using that as kind of a unique way to differentiate myself.
Have you made connections or friends with other, blind content creators, over the years?
Yeah, I know a few of them. I've met quite a few different blind or low vision creators, content creators and advocates and things. I've met them through Twitter, through other consulting work, or just through, online, that kind of a thing. I've worked with a couple of them on different projects. And so that's been pretty fun.
Now, with all the advocacy that you're doing, and we've obviously seen, some progression, Last of Us Part 2 and just, some other, kind of focus on accessibility,
Mhm.
most games still do not have enough accessibility or any accessibility to make it playable. It's still a very low percentage that are
Right.
really fully accessible for us. And, what do you think that, roadblock is, or prevention is? Is it just a lack of awareness? Is it, well, this costs too much and the group is too small to really make back any of our money? What do you think is the real reason that we're not seeing, more of it to this point?
Mhm.
And we have seen some progression. Do you see that kind of continuing
Well,
and more games having it?
yeah, it's a number of things actually. You touched on a few of them there. Some of it is awareness. I mean, some of them, obviously, if you're making a game, you want as many people to play it as possible. You want people to enjoy your game. Um, so just being some people, it's a matter of awareness of like, oh, this type of accessibility exists, or some people might know kind of like, oh yeah, well maybe we could make this accessible to the blind or visually impaired or whatever. But they don't really know how to get started. It just seems really overwhelming. Like, how would I take this primarily visual medium, or how would I make this game that is really visual, and how would I adapt that into being playable by the blind?
Mhm.
So it's definitely, a different mindset to get into, but I would argue it really doesn't really have anything to do with being a AAA developer or an indie developer, because honestly, some of the best and most awesome accessible gaming content has been from indie developers, even mainstream indie developers. A couple great examples of that is on the PC. There was the first game that I really saw that blew me away. That was a mainstream game that happened to make itself totally blind accessible, was Skullgirls. It was this 2D fighting game,
Right.
and originally it had started out with this kind of hack where the text that was in the game, they kind of passed it through to the clipboard and a screen reader could use it. But then they actually went back and added full native screen reader support to it. And so any of like the menus, the text dialogue, the move lists, everything, you could run like NVDA or JAWS or whatever, and you could just you ran the screen reader and then you started the game and everything spoke. It was really amazing. There's another guy, a one-man developer, who made a game called Sequence Storm. It's a rhythm racing game. It's kind of got like a Guitar Hero type note highway, but it's like a racing game as well. It's a really neat mixture. I'm actually terrible at it, but it's really cool. He's added a couple of blind accessible modes so blind players can play it. And what was really surprising to me is in that game, you play through the story mode and they have these little animations or little pictures during some of the story bits. And I was listening to it. I was actually streaming it once. And um, as it was doing that, he actually, because I had the screen reader on or the text to speech in the game on, he actually added like descriptive audio that was telling like, oh, this is, this scene, there's a computer and the guy he's trying to sneak into or
Right.
whatever. It had like
Audio described
descriptive
it almost.
text.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was like, wow, that's above and beyond. Um, but one of the other barriers I think is really the like right now, like I said, we have the accessibility on the consoles and the PC, and like, every platform pretty much has a screen reader. But the barrier is most of the games are developed in these game engines. Unreal or Unity
Unity.
are the
Yeah.
two. And until recently, neither of them really had any accessibility features or any accessibility hooks, because you have to be able to pass whatever text or whatever items or whatever is happening in the game to either a text to speech platform or a screen reader. So there's no way for the game to communicate through Unity or through Unreal to your screen reader. But that is starting to change, because I know both Unreal and Unity are starting to try and put some of this accessibility, especially screen reader accessibility, natively into their engines. So hopefully in the next few years, we're going to start seeing more of that. And that will really help developers, because right now, if you see a game like the ones I just mentioned, if you see a game that does really well with accessibility, everyone is really kind of having to reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
So it's like every time I want to write a Word document, I got to code the whole damn word processor.
Right.
Where, if you have some of this stuff baked into the engines, as long as they code it like they do iOS correctly, where VoiceOver can see it, then your games can at least have a base level for narration or whatever. They can, whatever they bake into it,
Right.
they can have that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the iOS is so good for accessible games,
Mm-hmm.
because there is already, as you said, the kind of built into the, what they're developing on has some
Right.
accessibility.
But the developers do have to code it to meet certain standards so
Yeah.
that they have that. But as long as they do, we're good. We're good.
And talking to a lot of indie developers as well, and asking them, well, why did you put accessibility in your game? A lot of them were like, one of two reasons. Some blind person reached out to them and said, hey, I can sort of play your game, and if you just did XYZ, I could play it fully. And that kind of clued them in on, oh, there is a need for accessibility that they explored and added into their game. And then the second kind of main thing I hear is, I'm just looking for anyone to play my game. So if I can add accessibility and that opens up more people to play my game, I'm all for that, because I just want people to, I'm passionate about what I created, and I want more people to see it. So, I think that's why we see a lot of, interesting things out of that indie group, because, they have reason to do it. We're not necessarily, a small, group to them. You know what I mean? If
Right.
if they can get 100 blind people to play it, that might double their sales. You know what I mean?
Oh, exactly. I mean,
So
with the competition, as many ways as there is to get a game out there right now, just getting anyone to look at your game is a win in a lot of those cases. And the other thing, if you're an indie developer, you can kind of more easily decide, okay, we're going to make this a priority. You go to a triple A studio, you may have a few champions of accessibility in the team, but you've got several hundred, if not several thousand people working on a title. And if you don't get that core buy-in from management, from the stakeholders, and that's still kind of a problem. Like, some people, they want to do it because, hey, it's the right thing to do, we want more people to play our game. But you still do have some people that are like you said, well, is the cost going to be worth it? Is it going to compromise my vision?
right.
Is it going to be worth doing? And like, the only way that the management, or that some people will see it, is if you shove a spreadsheet under their nose and say, hey, this is how many people you can get. And, like, this is, it's a numbers game for them, um, which kind of stinks, but sometimes that's what it is.
For the roadblocks that exist that we've just kind of talked about, I mean, what would you recommend that we can do as, players of accessible games to help clear those roadblocks? What things can we do to elevate accessibility in the mind's eye of developers?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I would say, don't be shy, and contact a developer. Reach out to a developer if you are interested in playing a game. Maybe try it out, either, download it on iOS, or, on Xbox. You have one of their great features is Game Pass. If you pay, $10 a month or 15 for Game Pass Ultimate, there's a huge number of games that you can simply download or even stream for free, with your Game Pass cost. And it's a great way to try out a game and say, well, is this going to be accessible enough for me? Then you're not out the $50, $60. But reach out to a developer, and you want to be really constructive about it. If it doesn't work, just don't be like, hey, I really want to play your game, but it is horribly inaccessible. Try to, either like give them ideas, be constructive, be helpful about it. If you know of another game that's in their genre, like let's say you want to play a first person shooter or a puzzle game, maybe find like, oh, here's, if you're interested, here's how another developer made a puzzle game or in a role playing game accessible. Just give them some options, link them to the game accessibility guidelines, or like if it's an Apple game, the Apple accessibility, the developer accessibility page, so they can learn how to make their apps voiceover accessible. Like kind of do some of the initial resources linking for them and say, hey, these resources are out there. um, and I and a bunch of other people would love to play your game, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. So those are a couple of things that I would do. And I follow a lot of people on Twitter, game developers, other advocates, and just communicating with them. And I've reached out to a few game developers who, like you said, have their games are partially there, but they're not quite there. It's like, hey, if you would just fix this one thing, this could work pretty well. Um, and recently there's also been, I would really like to touch on quickly, there's been a couple of game mods for PC games that have been really good lately, and in a variety of different things. So if you've heard of Stardew Valley,
Mhm.
which is kind of a farming sim social game where, like, you're growing your own little farm, you can go mining, you can go socialize with the people in the town. There's a Stardew Access mod and a couple of other mods that you can plug in that they're working on right now. Third party is making a mod for that to make it blind accessible. Hearthstone, there's this card battling game. If you've heard like Magic the Gathering, it's kind of like that, but the people who are developing the mod for that have done an amazing job of making that accessible for the PC. And I've actually been working with another developer, um, he's continuing to update it. Again, this is a one man dude, basically. Well, he's gotten a little bit of help, but um, there's a mod, believe it or not, for the original Doom and Doom 2
Hmm.
and an accessible level pack, but he's making this Toby accessibility mod, and it's basically making blind accessible levels. And he just released a video this past weekend where he's made some other improvements to it. And so, yeah, I mean, even 25 plus years later, Doom is one of, if not my favorite games of all time. And so just to be able to see, even all this time later, that this game that I've loved for so many years has, more people are going to be able to try to play it, is awesome.
What has been your overall favorite gaming accessibility experience?
Um, I would say I have a couple. I mean, for iOS, I really, really loved the Something Else games, the Pampa Sangre games, but especially Audio Defense, Zombie Arena. Those were
Hmm.
just for what they could do on with audio and on mobile. It was just
A
really
lot of
incredible.
games that are not available anymore, as you were saying
Exactly what I
before.
was referring to earlier. Yeah. But then you have, like I said, The Last of Us 2 was just what I was able to, just the way I was able to get through the game and not struggle with it. It just, oh, I want that level of accessibility in all a lot of these games now. And I think really the Toby accessibility mod, just because, I love especially more of the 90s era shooters, the Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem.
Hmm.
And there's been a kind of this resurgence of, like, people are developing new games in that style now, like Dusk and um a Medieval, and just so many of these other ones, that those are the kinds of shooters that I love to play. But just having this Toby accessibility mod, making a real game like that playable with no vision, it's just really cool. I think those are three that really stand out to me that I really loved.
And so again, personally, I have always geared towards console gaming because I love the put in a disc or download the game and it's playable and that's it, and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
With the computer, it always seems like there's some sort of struggle on it, or you have to go download something. And so I've always stayed away
Right.
from that, even as a sighted person, unless it was a
Right.
game unless it was like, Civilization 5 or something like that. I was just like, well, I got to play that.
Yeah.
But even like with that, when it got onto the console, I was like, oh, this is excellent. I'm going to play it on the console.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the consoles are coming a little bit more PC like. I mean, you especially look at AAA and that, you show me a game that doesn't have a day one patch nowadays.
Yeah, but they do the patch. Like it's forced down. Like I don't have to go and
Yeah.
I don't have to go
True.
find the patch somewhere, and or I don't have
True.
to go find the mod or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know,
Steam is really good about that, but like some of the mods and stuff, yeah, you do still have to go out and get those on your own right now. But even like things like Steam Workshop is being able to make that work a little bit better.
yeah. Well, but then I've always blind trying to navigate. I actually just the other day I just took all my Steam games off my computer because I
Hmm.
couldn't even navigate the Steam menu, let alone play the games that
No,
really didn't have.
Steam is, I mean, if you're looking at it from purely a screen reader thing, I know people do it. I use magnification because I can,
Right.
but like yeah, no, Steam that is one area where I really, really, really wish that Valve would care a little bit and make their platform more accessible. And I said this in a recent video when I was talking about the Steam Deck that just had recently come out. And Gabe Newell, the head of Valve, he's very public about sharing his email address and wanting people's thoughts and things. And I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I was thinking about it this weekend. Is you know I in one of my recent videos as well, I kind of encourage people. I'm like, hey, you know what, Steam is a problem. And he is, like I said, very open. He really wants people's feedback. Well, I'm like, well, you know what, let's email Mr. Gabe and say, hey, you have this huge audience of people that aren't able to really use your platform well. How about making your Steam platform and Steam Deck add some screen reader accessibility, add some blindness, and just any accessibility whatsoever. So I think I am going to. I mean, what's the worst that'll happen? I won't hear anything, or he'll say no.
Right. Right.
So I think that I am going to do that.
And you might know this better than I, because again, I'm just learning all this stuff, but kind of like a Steam competitor that does have accessibility is it called itch.io? Is that
Yeah, Itch is, I don't work with them as much. I have downloaded a few games. The nice thing about Itch is that you can get at it through their website a lot more. You can just download the files. Um, I don't know if they have a client. I think I've mainly just gone to their website and just downloaded whatever I've wanted.
Mhm.
Same thing with GOG. You can use their GOG Galaxy client, but you can just download. You can go to GOG.com and like when you buy a game, you can just download. Like I haven't downloaded many of the like new games on there, but like when they started, they were really focused on like, hey, let's
Pro?
make a lot of these old DOS games that I
Yeah.
still love. Let's make them actually playable in DOS box or on modern operating systems. So I would be downloading these classic games and just playing them that way.
I
So,
downloaded Warcraft Orcs versus Humans.
oh yes, oh
uh,
yes,
Before Warcraft became what it is now, it was a
yep,
resource manager, real time strategy game.
yep, exactly. Yep,
Uh,
yep.
what game do you really want to play that just isn't accessible?
Oh boy. I guess I'm trying to think of one game in particular. The answer that I used to give was the Yakuza series. And it still kind of is. Like I know that there are a couple of games that are spin-offs where they've added English voice acting, like the Judgment is kind of a spin-off of that. And I did try that, even though it has English voice acting, but even like to me, the open world navigation stuff, like there's not a lot of visual help of like getting your objectives. You have to look at a mini map and there's timed missions and stuff. But like I was a big fan of Shenmue back in the day. I mean, yes, it's horribly cheesy. The voice acting is in a lot of cases laughably bad, but there was just something really neat about like the amount of detail that they were able to put in this Dreamcast game. And the Yakuza games just seem to take that and make it like Shenmue, but actually add a lot more good gameplay to it. But it was all in Japanese audio. And I don't know Japanese and I can't read subtitles fast enough
Right.
to really be able to play those. So that's kind of been my answer is like, I especially when they just switched over to being more of a turn-based type thing in their recent game, but most of them have been this sort of open world game like Shenmue, but they had the real-time kind of beat 'em up brawler combat. So that's one series that I would like to be able to play better.
Mine is the have you ever heard of Out of the Park Baseball?
Mm-hmm.
So mine is Out of the Park Baseball, which I played quite a bit when I was sighted. Had a 75-year history of the baseball team that I had been leading.
Oh man.
And went blind and couldn't play it. Just really
Mm-hmm.
inaccessible. And new to blindness, didn't know anything, so I was like, all right, well, they just can't do it. And then I played a game on the phone called Football Chairman Pro, which is a soccer simulation
Right.
game, and it's kind of conceptually the same. It's like you have players, you have all their stats, you're trading
Mm-hmm.
players, you're setting them in your lineup. And so I went back to Out of the Park Baseball and wrote the developer and said, hey, love your game, went blind, do you have any accessibility or plan to put in any accessibility?
Mm-hmm.
And randomly, it took them a year to respond.
Oh
I
wow.
had totally forgotten that I had really written them. So I had a year that they respond. Took a year for them to respond, and it was just basically like, oh, it's too complex. We can't do it.
Yeah, your generic kind of template response.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that might be true, but look, anything's possible if you want to spend the time and money. It's just they didn't want to spend the time and money
Well,
to
right.
do
And
it. So.
it's and if they were to go to like an updated version of their engine, usually every few years they'll kind of start from scratch again. If they would just build it in from scratch, I mean, yeah, it would be a little bit harder it's always harder to bolt things on later. But if you get the new generation of consoles and they're kind of starting fresh anyway, it'd be great if they would be able to. I mean, I miss for sports games. I really, really wish that EA didn't hold the monopoly to the NFL because I love the NFL 2K games,
Mhm.
NFL 2K and NFL 2K5. Man, they were just hitting. When 2K5 came out, I'm like, it was a good balance between simulation and more kind of casual arcade.
Mhm.
It had a really good mix. And I really don't like the really simulation Madden style near as much. But
Yeah.
I miss the 2K games so much. They were great.
So I
Or
loved,
NFL Blitz.
yeah, I loved if you go back, Tecmo Bowl.
Oh, hell yeah,
We
man.
played so much Tecmo Bowl, but it was, you had like 6 plays
Yep.
and, it's pretty simple little characters on the screen. And we would just run seasons, stay up all night and
Hmm.
just run, the four of us in the basement, you know, drinking pop and,
I
eating
I
chips and
believe, yeah, I believe that's on the Switch Online service, or
uh,
it's somewhere because I played it not very long ago. I
and then
played some Tecmo Bowl. Yeah, I loved that back in the day.
and then when they moved to Madden, it was all too fast, and I don't know, I couldn't see what was going on. I mean, when you're
Right.
playing Tecmo Bowl, the whole field is there, so you could see your player that's open. The
Yep.
on Madden that the person's off screen. I'm like, I don't know if he's open or not. I can't even can't even see where this guy
Hmm.
is.
The
So
original NFL Blitz, like on the N64, oh man, we played that all like because it was super fast, super arcadey. That game, yeah, NFL Blitz and the 2K series were my two favorite football. Tecmo Bowl was an early great too, or Blades of Steel.
yeah,
That was good
oh
too.
yeah, we still. I mean, it's 30 some odd years later, and we still make, when I'm with my friends that we did those seasons, we still have jokes from playing those seasons.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So it was good times. So the games that you play on, or that you cover on your website, whether it be
Mhm.
iOS or console, I mean, how do you pick those games? So, do you find out, oh, there is some sort of accessibility, catch kind of wind of that, or do you just pick up a game and give it a try and see what's what?
It's a combination. I cover, like I said, I'll cover quite a few accessible games. I don't necessarily get to them all. But I've had people, contact me on Twitter or leave a comment on a video and say like, hey, I just heard about this, or I've gotten even a couple emails like, hey, I think this would be a good game for you to cover. And, if possible, I will try to look into it. There are a few games that I'm just not interested in really at all. So I don't know that I would be a good person to cover it. Like I know there's a bunch of, and I don't hold it, anything against them. But there's a bunch of these like baby sim games or something. Like I'm not the right person to really go into
Right.
detail on that because it's just really not my jam. But
I find with reviewing games, because I want to cover a wide variety of genres, because I want there to be a game for. So I end up playing a lot of games that I'm like, I have no interest in this game. It's not my jam, but I gotta play it and evaluate it and put it out there, because there is somebody who loves the baby simulator game, and I want them to know that that's out there for them. But,
right, and I do that to a degree. Like I said, I don't care for a lot of the turn-based games, but like I've played quite a few of them, and actually what I've really started to kind of discover is it's maybe not even so much the turn-based stuff that I don't mind as much, but if you have, now that some of these, especially on iOS, I covered one recently called Dungeons and Such, which is just kind of this really neat little dungeon battle. It almost reminds me of Diablo in a way, because you're going down these levels of this dungeon. But it's, now that all the stats and all the menus and everything are voiceover accessible, I kind of don't mind them as much, because, some of it is, I don't really care for as much of that gameplay style, but I think a lot of it is just being able to easily read all the text and look at all your stats and things, where it's easier now. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, some of it is like, I will get recommendations from other people. Some of it is just like, I'll hear about a game like on a podcast or a website or Twitter, or there'll just be a game that I'm looking forward to. I generally do cover more mainstream games than accessible games, like low vision games, because there's like, there's just, the fact is there's a way more of them. So I try to kind of spread things out. Like, one video I'll do a low vision game, one I'll do a iOS accessible game. I try to, split things up so that everyone kind of gets something that they might be interested in.
So, I'm going to tell people that they should all go follow you on Twitter and follow your illegally cited YouTube page, and that's how they're going to find out about stuff. But, what pages are you looking at? There are people that are you're following about accessible games.
If you're really interested in finding accessible games, a couple that immediately come to mind, if you are an Apple user, I would say AppleViz is a great place to go. Their accessible app and game directory. They have one for Mac, they have one for iOS. And they'll, you can look under the games category and say, oh, I want to look, see what games are available, and they'll rate them on how accessible they are or how not accessible they are. Audiogames.net is also a great place. They will cover some iOS stuff, but if you're looking for more PC or console type stuff, they'll have a lot more of that there as well. So audiogames.net is a good place to look if you're looking for accessible audio games of sorts. And then just really start following people. Maybe you find a person on YouTube that you like, or Twitch, or you follow a podcast. We cover some things. I've been a co-host on a few episodes of Blind Abilities or Blind Bargains. They've covered some games and stuff in the past. So things like that, or just individual people like myself or other blind, low vision gamers on YouTube or Twitch or Twitter. People will usually announce like, oh, hey, this is coming out, or I'm going to be streaming this or covering that game. Those are really good places to look. And then like for mainstream games, like if you do have some usable vision and you just kind of want to hear about, like keep up on the mainstream side of things, again, I go back to the Giant Bomb guys, their quick look videos and their bombcast. I listen to those every week. I really like them. Um, and it's just kind of finding a group of people that you really like. There's another one that I enjoy called the Player One podcast. They're pretty amusing. But they just cover and what I like about them is they're older gamers, 30s, 40s, whatever, but they're adults and they got lives and stuff. And they're just like, hey, we still play games.
Um, Besides, I want to make sure that I've told people all the places that they can find you, so they can obviously find your illegally cited YouTube page.
Mhm.
Under Twitter. What handle do you go by under Twitter?
Yeah, it shows up as illegally cited, but if you follow me on Twitter, it's at BGFH79. It's an old tag that I just kind of ended up using and threw together at BGFH79 on Twitter. YouTube is illegally cited, the channel, and Twitch is illegally cited as well. And illegallycited.com, even though the website is horribly basic, I have not really done much updating to it. It's kind of just like a basic, like, hey, here's some stuff I'm working on, and I need to update it again with a couple things, like maybe this episode that I'm going to be on here.
Yeah, very good.
So yeah, that's kind of where you can find all my projects and shenanigans that I've been working on.
All right, excellent. Well, I always like to give the ending over to the interviewee of, is there any final words that you have for the people who are going to be listening to this? Any words of encouragement or advice or things that they should be doing to promote accessibility? Just kind of your final thoughts.
I mean, I know we have a long way to go yet as far as making games, just making all games accessible. We have a long way to go, but I'm encouraged. In the past 5 years, we've gone from like kind of virtually nothing to in a pretty good place. I've always figured that we would have consoles that would have built-in accessibility features, but I figured it would take a lot longer than it did. And so we're making progress there. We have some indie developers and even triple A game examples now that we can point to and say, hey, see, this is possible. Whether you're a one-man operation or a big studio, we can, there are some great examples. If you, speaking from the gamer side of things, if you are interested in game accessibility, kind of take it seriously, like I said, write to a developer or contact a developer and, be constructive, be helpful about it, but let them know that you are interested in their game. And the other thing that I will say is, if a game comes out that does have accessibility features in it, if at all possible, try and support that developer, let other people know that
Absolutely.
the game exists. And more importantly, please try to support the game and the developer financially. One of the things that I see a lot is whenever a new app or game comes out, I see a flood of threads about, hey, can I have a coupon code? Can I have a coupon code? And like, I know they can give a few out here and there, but like, that's kind of why some of these developers have gone under, is you have a limited market to begin with. They developers got to eat, man. So, you
Yeah,
really
you
want
have
to,
to make it worth their while. I mean,
right.
they're, this is why I started this whole interview series. I interview a lot of
Hmm.
game developers, and it's to, let people know that there's a real life human behind this who's working really hard and, has
Absolutely.
a family and has kids and, has an apartment and has to feed themselves. And,
Hmm.
if you've enjoyed their game, pay for their game.
Absolutely.
Write a review.
Please support them,
Yeah.
share,
Yeah, if you
buy
want
their
more,
game.
yeah, if you want more games from them, if you like the game and you hope they're going to do another game, make it worth their while to do it.
Absolutely.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for being on. Everybody, that was Jesse Anderson from Illegally Cited. Really enjoyed the efforts that you've been doing to elevate game accessibility, through your YouTube page, and the work that you've done with game developers to create more accessible experiences for us blind and visually impaired gamers. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us, and please keep us posted on things that you're doing, because I think you're a great resource for the blind community and the visually impaired community around gaming and other tech issues.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me on again. And yeah, it was fun.
I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yep. Have a good one.